Imagine a train, heavy and slow, cutting through the endless frozen white of the Siberian wilderness in 1918. Inside those wooden crates isn't just metal, it's the physical remains of the Russian Empire. Over 500 metric tons of pure gold bullion. At the time, this was the second largest reserve on the planet, a literal mountain of wealth that made the Russian ruble one of the most respected currencies in the world. To the soldiers guarding it, that gold was the only thing standing between civilization and total collapse. It was the ultimate insurance policy. But then the fog of the Civil War swallows the tracks. By the time the Bolsheviks finally cornered the White Army leaders and forced open the vaults, the mountain had become a molehill. Hundreds of tons had simply evaporated. There were rumors, of course. Stories of crates being dumped into the depths of Lake Baikal to keep them out of revolutionary hands, or secret shipments diverted to Japanese ports in exchange for crates of rifles that never arrived. Some said the gold was melted down in European backrooms, its imperial stamps erased to fund the very Bolsheviks who claimed to despise it. One moment, Russia sat on a foundation of gold that stretched across half the globe. The next, the vaults were echoing with nothing but the sound of wind. What's truly unsettling isn't just the heist itself, but how quickly the eternal wealth of an empire turned into a ghost story. While the elites and foreign powers were busy slicing up the remains, the ordinary Russian citizen was left holding paper rubles that were suddenly worth less than the firewood used to keep warm. That instantaneous shift from the absolute certainty of being a global financial powerhouse to a reality where people traded heirlooms for a single loaf of bread reveals a terrifying truth about the nature of money. It makes you realize that even the most solid mountain of gold is only as real as the stability of the hands holding the keys. And once that trust cracks, the wealth doesn't just change hands, it vanishes into the chaos of history.
That image is. It's just so powerful. The train just vanishing into the snow. It's cinematic for sure, but it really is the perfect way to frame what we're digging into today.
Right.
Because this deep dive, it isn't really about a bank robbery. I mean, it is, technically. It might be the biggest bank robbery in history.
One of the biggest, for sure.
But we're really tracing the disintegration of the entire Russian Imperial Gold Reserve.
And as you said in the opening, this wasn't just some local bank's fault. This was the largest gold reserve in Europe, second largest on the entire planet.
Exactly. And that's why if we just focus on the heist, play detective and try to follow the gold bars, we miss the real story. We miss the actual tragedy.
Yeah, the stakes are so much higher.
The stakes are everything.
Yeah.
This story is, I think, a perfect case study for what happens when a financial system completely loses its anchor. It's about how the literal physical disappearance of all that gold triggered a sociological collapse, a total economic breakdown that fundamentally changed how people behaved.
It's the difference between, say, losing your wallet and waking up one morning to find out the concept of money itself just doesn't work anymore.
That's a great way to put it, precisely. So we're going to look at the before and the after. We have to understand how a society can go from this state of absolute financial stability and discipline to total chaos.
Okay, so to get to that point of breakdown, we have to start with that before picture. Because before all the chaos, there was this incredible sense of solidity, of permanence.
Right. And there's a really compelling account from the archives that I think illustrates that shift from order to chaos perfectly. It gets into the psychology of it.
I was recently diving into some digitized personal archives from the late Russian Imperial era, and I came across a series of letters from a man named Alexei, a senior clerk at the State Bank in Petrograd. I want you to try and imagine the quiet, cold morning in 1914 when the first heavy crates of bullion were wheeled out of the vaults to fund the mobilization. Alexei wrote about the hollow sound the marble floors made once the weight of the gold was gone. For him, those gold bars weren't just currency. They were the physical manifestation of a promise that the world would remain predictable. But as the hard asset discipline was abandoned to feed the Great War, Alexei noticed something chilling. The social order didn't just bend, it evaporated. He described how the bank's own guards, once the most disciplined men in the city, began to look at the remaining crates not with duty, but with a predatory hunger.
I see.
When the institution stopped valuing its foundation, the individuals within it stopped valuing the law. It's a sobering reminder that when the hard reality of a system is traded for short-term survival, the very bonds of civilization, the trust between the protector and the protected, simply dissolve into enemy. My takeaway from Alexei's letters is that we often mistake the rules of society for something permanent, but they are actually fragile reflections of the fiscal integrity of our institutions.
And that word you used, enemy, it's absolutely crucial here. Because the structural collapse of the Russian gold reserve, it's really a clinical case study in how abandoning that hard asset discipline by the elites, it triggers this social enemy. It's the total dissolution of the bonds that hold a civilization together.
It's just fascinating that Alexei, this bank clerk, heard that hollow sound as early as 1914. Because if you just looked at the books, Russia was a financial titan. We're talking about 1,200 metric tons of gold.
Yeah.
That's about 1.7 billion rubles at the time. An unbelievable amount.
It was a literal mountain. And because of that mountain, the Russian ruble was, as good as gold. It had something like 98% backing. So if you were holding a paper ruble, you absolutely knew there was a physical piece of metal in a vault in Petrograd that was anchoring its value.
And that stability, that trust, it opened the floodgates for investment.
Oh, completely. Massive foreign investment, especially from the French and the British. Russia was essentially this giant engine of global capitalism where everybody wanted in because they knew the house had the reserves to cover any bet.
On top of that, they were an export powerhouse. They were the largest exporter of foodstuffs in the entire world.
Yeah.
So you've got this massive reserve, a strong export economy, huge foreign investment. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
World War I. That's what went wrong. The war was the ultimate destroyer of national wealth. Almost immediately, that mountain of gold began to just flow west.
Right, because they needed guns, they needed shells.
Their own industry just couldn't scale up fast enough. They were trying to fight a modern war with a pre-modern industrial base. They needed millions of shells, rifles, all kinds of supplies, so they had to buy them. And the Allies, Britain and France, they wanted payment. So the gold starts physically moving to London and to Japan.
Okay, so this is where the discipline breaks. This is the moment Alexei was talking about. They're shipping the actual gold out, but they still have to pay soldiers and workers at home.
Exactly. The government starts printing paper money that isn't backed by anything. They just fire up the printing presses to fund the war. They break the golden rule. They abandon convertibility. And at the same time, they're shipping gold out, not just for payment, but as collateral for loans.
And that's a really key distinction. Collateral means it's sitting in a vault somewhere in London, and it's still technically Russian gold. But they can't touch it.
You can't touch it, correct. So your domestic money supply is exploding, you're getting the first hints of inflation, while the physical anchor that gives it all meaning is shrinking and getting locked away overseas. By the time you get to 1917, the whole system is just incredibly fragile. And then the Bolsheviks seize power.
This part always feels like a scene from a movie to me. The Bolsheviks take over in October 1917. And of course, the first thing they want is the banks. They want the gold.
But the banks didn't want them. This is a detail that often gets overlooked. There was a bank strike. All of the clerks, the directors, people like our friend Alexei from the letter, they just refused to work with the revolutionaries. They saw them as illegitimate thugs.
So what does Lenin do? He's not exactly the negotiating type.
No. He sends armed sailors, literally with a marching band at their head, which is just such a strange theatrical detail. They march right up to the state bank. They go in and they demand the keys.
And bank directors just say no.
They refuse, flat out. So the Bolsheviks literally have to break into their own country's vaults. They force them open. And this is the first huge shock for the new regime. They were expecting to find billions in liquid cash and gold just sitting there, ready to fund the world revolution.
And they found
the mountain had become a molehill. A huge portion of it was already gone. It had either been shipped out for the war, or the previous government had already moved it deeper into the country for safety. They found far, far less than they ever anticipated. The mountain was already shrinking before they even got their hands on it.
And that single realization that the national piggy bank is almost empty, that has to set off this incredible, desperate scramble.
Yeah.
Because now we're moving into the Civil War. The Bolsheviks have the capital, but the gold is somewhere else.
Right. The provisional government, before they fell, had moved a massive chunk of what was left to Kazan, a city on the Volga River. They thought it would be safe there, away from the Germans, away from the chaos in Petrograd.
Safe in theory.
Yeah.
But in 1918, that theory it goes up in smoke.
Completely. In August 1918, the anti-Bolshevik forces, specifically a group called the People's Army and the Czech Legion, they captured Kazan, and with the city, they captured the gold.
And we're talking about a massive amount. 650 million rubles worth, something like 500 tons.
Roughly half of the empire's entire remaining wealth in one place. And this kicks off the next phase of the tragedy. because it stops being about accounting and it becomes about pure looting.
Imagine you're standing on a railway platform in Kazan in 1918, watching the golden train pull away, carrying what remained of a nation's future. I was researching the looting of the Kazan gold, and I found an account from a young railway worker who saw the chaos firsthand. He described the predatory populism that took hold not just from the revolutionary leaders, but from every opportunistic faction that realized the common sense of the old world was dead. As the gold was divided, stolen, and moved by the White Army and various foreign interests, the productive middle class, the doctors, the engineers, the small shopkeepers, were the ones left holding the worthless paper bags. The looting wasn't just a theft of metal. It was a betrayal of every person who had worked hard and played by the rules. I've seen some modern commentary that leans quite heavily into the politics of this, blaming specific ideologies. But when I look at this story, my feeling is more about the universal tragedy of institutional decay. When the shared social glue, the collective belief in a fair system, is traded for power and plunder, the productive class is always the first to be sacrificed. It's a haunting parallel to any era where institutional integrity fails. I try to understand the anger and the extreme emotions of that time. It wasn't just about lost wealth. It was about the heartbreak of realizing that the system you built your life upon was no longer looking out for you.
That phrase, shared social glue, really gets to the heart of it. The looting of the Kazan gold and the hyperinflation that followed, it provides this sobering parallel to any kind of institutional decay. It shows how losing that glue, whether it's gold or just common sense, inevitably leads to this rise of predatory populism. And the people who played by the rules get betrayed.
So Admiral Kolchak, the so-called supreme ruler of the whites, he takes control of this gold in Omsk, and it becomes the war chest for the entire anti-Bolshevik movement. But it starts disappearing. And fast.
It's what historians call the Great Hemorrhage, and it happens in a few ways. First, you have just direct theft. I mean, you have soldiers guarding these trains, they're seeing literal crates of gold and they're starving, or they want vodka, or they just see the writing on the wall and figure they should get there as well they can.
So there are actual reports of gold bars being traded for a loaf of bread or a bottle of booze.
Oh yeah, it just shows you how desperation can completely rewrite the concept of value. A solid gold bar for a bottle of vodka. But the bigger drain was institutional. Kolchak was trying to pay his allies, Japan, France, Britain, with this gold. He was buying rifles, uniforms, supplies.
But the supplies don't always show up.
They often never arrived. The gold would be shipped out. The allies would take it as payment or, again, as collateral. And the crates of rifles, they just vanished.
It really sounds like the foreign powers saw this as a free-for-all. Like they were just vultures picking over the carcass of the Russian Empire.
In many ways, they were. And then you have the Czechoslovak Legion. This is a fascinating part of the story. They were a military force that controlled the Trans-Siberian Railway, which was the absolute lifeline for everyone. And eventually, as Kolchak's government started to collapse, the Czechs just seized the gold from him.
They hijacked the empire's wallet.
They basically used it as a ransom ticket. It's unbelievable. They eventually handed a portion of it back to the Bolsheviks, but only in exchange for safe passage out of Russia for themselves. They bought their freedom with the Tsar's gold.
So after all this chaos, the Bolsheviks finally get some of it back. They recapture the train. But now they have a totally new problem. They have the gold, but no one in the world will touch it.
Right. The gold blockade. The Western powers, France, Britain, the US, they declare a complete blockade on Russian gold. They say, this is stolen property, we won't accept it. They refuse to trade with the Bolsheviks.
So you're in charge of a country that is starving, your industry is completely destroyed, you have tons of gold, but you can't spend a single ounce of it. How do you launder 500 tons of stolen gold?
You go to Sweden, you find a man named Olof Ashberg who becomes known as the Red Banker.
A laundry.
The laundry, exactly. The Bolsheviks start shipping the gold to Stockholm. Ashberg's bank would take the Tsarist coins and bars, which were all stamped with the Romanov eagles and were easily identifiable, and they'd melt them down.
Literally erasing history from the metal.
Erasing the imperial stamps. They'd melt them into anonymous bars or even restamp them with Swedish markings. And once it had a Swedish stamp on it, it was suddenly neutral gold. It could be sold on the global market.
Even to the United States.
Especially to the US. The irony is just. It's unbelievable. You have the Bolsheviks melting down the symbols of the empire they despise to fund the revolution they love by selling that gold to the capitalists they claim to hate. They used the Tsar's gold to buy locomotives, boots, and paper to print propaganda.
And while all this high-level international intrigue and laundering is going on, the situation for the average person on the ground in Russia is devolving into an absolute nightmare. Because, you have to remember, the gold backing is gone. The ruble is just paper.
And this is where we shift from the heist story to the sociological collapse. This is where it gets really dark.
I saw a story online a few months ago about a family in 1918 Moscow, documented to the diary of a school teacher named Elena. It perfectly captures that terrifying transition from a gold-backed reality to an inflationary nightmare. Elena describes a Tuesday when she went to buy bread with a handful of paper rubles that only a year prior could have bought a small house. By then, they were just colorful scraps of paper. She wrote about the eyes of the people in the queue, how they stopped looking at each other as neighbors and started looking at each other as competitors for survival. This is what sociologists call the atomized survival mode. Because the shared economic reality had vanished, the social fabric tore apart. Elena's own sister refused to share a bag of salt with her, hiding it under a floorboard instead. It wasn't that people became evil. It's that when money loses its meaning, the glue that allows us to cooperate disappears. Reading Elena's account, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy for how quickly our modern civilized behavior depends on a stable medium of exchange. It's easy to judge the desperation of the past from the comfort of the present, but Elena's story shows us that when the floor of a shared economy falls through, even the most cultured families are forced into a defensive, lonely struggle for existence.
And that's exactly it. Analyzing the disappearance of Russia's gold through that lens, that sociological critique, it shows how that shift from a gold-backed world to an inflationary paper economy. It forces people into that defensive, atomized survival mode. And it's that mode that ultimately destroys the nation's social fabric.
And this atomized survival wasn't just some accident of history. It was made worse by actual policy. You had war communism.
Right. The Bolsheviks, partly because of ideology and partly just out of sheer desperation, they tried to create a moneyless economy. They thought if they just printed enough money, they could destroy the value of capital and move straight to some kind of state-run barter system.
And, well, it definitely succeeded in destroying the value. That part worked.
Oh, it worked perfectly. The statistics are just mind-boggling. From 1918 to 1921, the ruble completely collapsed. By 1923, you have hyperinflation so bad that people are being paid in products. You work at a shoe factory, your salary is a pile of shoes. You work at a broom factory, here's your pay, a bunch of brooms.
And then you have to run all over the city trying to trade your brooms for a loaf of bread.
Exactly. It's primitive accumulation. It was exhausting and totally inefficient. And the state eventually realized that, ideology couldn't buy German turbines. You needed hard assets.
Which brings us to the early 1930s. The gold from the train is long gone. It's been spent on the war or stolen or laundered away. But now Stalin has a new massive plan. Industrialization. He wants to build giant factories, dams, power plants overnight.
And to do that, he needs American and German technology. He needs to import turbines, tractors, lathes, and the West isn't taking paper rubles. They want one thing, gold.
But the state treasury is empty. The mountain is gone. So where do they look for gold?
They look at the people. This kicks off the gold panic of the early 30s. The state had this realization that there was still gold in Russia. It just wasn't in the state bank anymore. It was in mattresses, hidden in floorboards, and in the jewelry boxes of the population.
And this is where Torgsin comes in.
Torgsin. It's an acronym for Trade with Foreigners. Originally, these were just fancy stores for diplomats and tourists where you could buy luxury goods using hard currency. But in 1931, the state makes a critical pivot. They opened Torgsin stores to all Soviet citizens.
But there's a catch, right? You can't just walk in and use your ruble.
No rubles allowed. You could only buy the goods in Torgsin if you paid with precious metals. Gold coins, old jewelry, silver spoons, diamonds, anything.
And this happens to coincide with the Great Famine of 1932-33. That context is absolutely crucial.
It is the defining context. You have millions of people literally starving to death. The regular shops are empty, but Torgsin is full. Torgsin has flour, sugar, butter, fabric, everything you need to survive.
So you create this situation where a starving family might have a single silver spoon left, or a grandmother's wedding ring, or an old czarist gold coin hidden away.
And Torgsin became the perfect mechanism to extract that hidden wealth. It was like a sorcerer's stone for the state. It turned the last remnants of personal wealth The wedding rings, the religious crosses, the earrings into state industrial power. People were trading their family history for a bag of flour.
The numbers on this are just staggering.
The state procured about 100 tons of pure gold from the population this way. That was something like 40% of the country's entire industrial mining output at the time. Torgsin stores out-owned major exports like timber or grain. It was a massive financial success for the Soviet state.
It feels like a heist in reverse. Instead of the state breaking into a vault, they create a situation so desperate that people are forced to bring their gold to them.
It was effectively a state-sponsored buyout of the population's last remaining assets at artificially low rates, all happening during a famine. And if you had too much gold, Torgsin wasn't the only tool they had. The OGPU, the secret police, they were watching every transaction.
The golden cells.
Yes. If the clerks at Torgsin noticed someone bringing in a suspicious amount of gold, they would flag them. The police would arrest them, take them to these places called golden cells. They were often standing room-only cells, packed tight with people, where they would hold them until they confessed where the rest of their family's gold was hidden.
So if the carrot of food didn't work to get the gold, the stick of imprisonment and torture did.
Precisely. And by 1936, the operation was basically complete. The most urgent industrialization needs had been met, domestic gold mining in the Gulag camps had ramped up, and the people had been effectively drained of their pre-revolutionary wealth. And so, Torgsin was closed. The golden idea, as they called it, had worked.
What a harrowing trajectory. I mean, we started this deep dive with a 1,200-ton mountain of gold sitting in a vault, protecting a currency. Then we watched it get loaded onto a train, looted in the Siberian snow, laundered in Sweden, and we end up with a single wedding ring being traded for a bag of flour in a special store during a famine.
And that entire trajectory, it perfectly tracks the collapse of the society itself. The loss of the gold wasn't just some accounting error on a balance sheet. It broke the social contract. It forced an entire society from a state of trust where a piece of paper, a ruble, meant something to a state of total atomization, where your own neighbor is your competitor for a loaf of bread.
It really forces you to reconsider what we even mean by wealth. We tend to think of it as this permanent thing, something solid locked away in a vault, something that exists independently of us.
But the story of the Russian gold proves that value is actually a relationship. It's a relationship between a government and its people, between a currency and the trust we place in it. And when that relationship breaks, the gold doesn't just disappear. The entire world that was built on top of it dissolves, leaving people to pick through the wreckage, trading the last remnants of their past for the mere survival of their future.